Okay, Dad, today is Saturday, July 13th. We didn't have a podcast yesterday because you were recovering from heart surgery and you're still maybe a little slow, anesthesia still wearing off of you.
Yeah, minor heart surgery. It wasn't anything like, um, yeah, they didn't
Yeah,
break open my chest or anything like that.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
but
cardiac ablation. Still, it's a heart surgery is heart surgery. But I was thinking, you're recovering from anesthesia. I still think, despite that, you will be, much more eloquent than our president. Um, we can kind
yeah,
of
well,
start there.
yeah, I had quite a few Biden moments during the first few hours after waking up from surgery. I think I know what it's like to be Joe Biden, or I knew back then. Hard to remember where I was, what I said 30 seconds ago.
Yeah, it's just I just can't get over the fact that he's our president and that we're running with him. You know
Well,
that.
yeah, maybe we'll see.
Yeah, after this big boy press conference is what they were calling it, at the NATO summit. You know, what I've been, a lot of people are saying, a lot of pundits are saying that he did just good enough to still stay in the race and still that the Democrats can't kick him aside, which is mind blowing. I'm like, really? Did we see the same press conference? Because clearly he's
Yeah,
not all there.
right.
He's just clearly
Yeah,
old. It's
right.
just
Well, that was the overwhelming impression for me, that he was just very old, very feeble, and that he managed to string together sentences that more or less made sense, but just barely. I mean, he was dealing with sometimes fairly complex issues, and um, he didn't demonstrate any real understanding. You didn't see any forceful intellect. You would want somebody, when you're talking about economic policy, or certainly, foreign policy, which is, of course, mostly what he talked about there. When your adversaries are Russia and China. I don't think they need to be adversaries, but that's what they've chosen. You want to see a forceful leader, right? A vigorous leader, and a leader who is obviously intellectually in command, has a grasp of the facts, and understands all the arguments, thinks ahead. And you didn't get any of that sense. It was just like he barely managed to give something what you might call a reply that, more or less, he more or less answered the questions, but he did so very feebly and with just very minimal coherence.
right. No, it was a very uncomfortable press conference. I didn't enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
I thought like, oh, this might be interesting. Watch him, watch his gaffes, and it might be kind of comic. But I didn't find it really
No,
funny.
no,
I
it's
just
actually
found
it's a
it
very sad spectacle.
right. Yeah, it was very painful. And I think that's how the whole world felt watching it. First of all, most people don't really pay attention to these NATO summits, but everybody tuned into this NATO summit. It's not so much to hear what, the NATO stuff, is more to see Joe Biden. Like this is the guy that's in charge of the supposed free world, and waging these complex conflicts in Israel and Palestine and Ukraine and Russia. And it was just like I was kind of almost just rooting for him, almost like, just come on, just hold it together. But he couldn't. He just couldn't do it, and it just I can't believe that this is what we have. That
Right.
this is our president. This is the leader, and I don't know. What do you think is just the impact of this this NATO summit and his speech just on NATO and these conflicts and just his presidency overall?
Yeah. Well, clearly, I think there's panic behind the scenes. Um, some people are trying to maintain a brave front, and, like you say, claim that this was a success for him. But I think it was clear to everyone who was there, which were all the presidents and prime ministers of NATO countries, that this guy is not up to the task, and they must be very, very worried. Um, and I think they're probably going to have to come to terms with Trump presidency. I think maybe that's what a lot of them walked away thinking, is say, okay, we're going to have a President Trump, in starting January of next year. Um, yeah, this after basically, they said that it was expressed by Biden, and and I think at least one of the questioners, probably more than one, that that Trump could possibly end NATO. That, that clearly, that they've made it clear at this conference and other places that they simply don't want Trump. I think that's remarkable in itself and shows how things have changed. In past years, NATO was never supposed to get involved in U.S. Domestic politics. I mean, it was unthinkable that it would. It was just taken for granted that, these were domestic affairs of the U.S. and that NATO would continue. Now, I guess the reason that they bring it up is this idea that somehow Trump would end NATO. And he's made comments like that in the past. But he also has a record. He was president for 4 years from 2016 to 2020, and he in fact strengthened NATO during that time. And I think that ended NATO. He made these requests that the NATO countries contribute more to the collective defense, and they did. In the end, NATO was a bigger organization and a more well-funded organization at the end of his term. There are a lot of people that, let's say, who are on our side that are very excited about a Trump presidency because we see the potential that, maybe he could end NATO, or maybe he could at least restrain NATO. But I think the record really tells us something different. Occasionally he says things to get people on one side riled up and the other side hopeful. But then he'll say the opposite thing like 2 weeks later. For example, he said, well, if I was in charge, I would have bombed Moscow. Right?
Right.
So anyway, yeah, there's, I think they're going to, these NATO leaders are grappling with the fact that they're going to have Trump in charge. And I've heard anyway that they've actually kind of made secret
provisions and
okay, there's that, but that also actually that they're contacting him. They're establishing lines of communication. After screaming that anybody but Trump, they realize, oh, we're going to have Trump, so we'll have to get used to it, and probably he won't change anything. I hope he might, but he will not.
Well, it's reassuring that he's talking to people like Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban seems to be a big fan of Trump. Trump seems to like Viktor Orban, and Orban, he was at the summit meeting because he had to be, because Hungary's part of NATO, but he immediately flew to Mar-a-Lago to have a meeting with Trump because he knows what's coming.
Right.
So the fact that he has some of those people in his ear is reassuring. But like we said before, just depends who he talked to last.
Yeah,
was he chatting with Lindsey Graham right before this, or was he chatting with Orban?
Yeah. Well, I think I think the last time that Trump had a meeting with Orban, I believe it was in Hungary. He announced after the meeting that not another penny for Ukraine. And then, of course, just a couple of weeks later, it was $61 billion for Ukraine.
Right.
So. Yeah, it is great that he talks to Orban and some other people. In the end, it matters who's staffing, the national security apparatus.
Right.
And so, in the end, it really doesn't matter if he's got people that are committed to the old policy under him.
Right. Yeah. You're saying that NATO's afraid that Trump will destroy NATO, but NATO is destroying NATO. They're destroying themselves by choosing to die on this Ukraine hill, this Ukraine project. Ukraine
that's why
isn't part of NATO. And I think people should also just realize that Ukraine didn't want to be part of NATO. In 2008, there was the announcement at a NATO summit saying that we're going to bring Ukraine into NATO.
Right.
And Ukraine said no. They had an election and they said, no, we don't want this.
Right.
And so what did we do? We decided to have a coup and said, you can't say no.
Yeah.
We tell
That's typical. Right.
Yeah.
That's not democratic,
Right. We say you want to be part of NATO, you have to be part of NATO.
Right.
So that's exactly what happened.
Right.
They made the announcement they want to be NATO. Like, no, we like our neutrality. We like being safe on having this buffer between both sides.
Right.
No, that wasn't the case. So we had the coup in 2014 and overthrew and put in a very pro-NATO, pro-American government. And so it's so crazy that we're going to destroy NATO by our insistence of trying to destroy. Ukraine's already destroyed. And NATO is going to be, if it if it exists after this whole Ukraine project's over, it's going to exist in a very greatly weakened form. It's no longer going to be that almighty NATO power. You know, this
Right.
is the dominant military power in the world. It's like, no, actually, you're not. You're a mess. You know, you're a bureaucratic shambles, and it's you can't produce munitions. You're not a force. You're a paper tiger. And that's what they're doing through this Ukraine project. So it's really insane how they just want to self-destruct like this. You
Yeah.
see it
Well,
a
I
lot
think
of
what happened is, they miscalculated. They underestimated Russian strength and resolve, and the stability of Russian society. They overestimated their own strengths and the support of their people, which is clearly lacking. And they provoked this war. And now that it's clear that they're losing, they're starting to panic because they realize, as you were just saying, they understand too that certainly their prestige, maybe their very existence is on the line. It was Boris Johnson himself who said that this is an existential threat to Western hegemony. We can't lose. So that's what they're thinking. Now it's just like, oh my God, we've gotten into this and we can't lose. But the thing is, they're losing. And so,
and there's just no way they can win. And this is what's so crazy to me. It's like they can't win, and they keep on, they bring Zelensky to all these NATO summit events. They keep on saying that, we've got a well-lit path for Ukraine to join NATO. And we keep on acting like Ukraine is part of NATO. And the speeches that, in this press conference that Biden gave, it gave the impression that, like, he's like, an attack on one is an attack on all. He's insinuating that, like, the attack on Russia, on Ukraine, is an attack on NATO. It's like they already assumed that Ukraine is NATO. They're acting that way. And it's just, it's insane.
Right. Well, but there is a difference, the fact that they're not officially part of NATO. I think it's fair to say that they were a de facto member of NATO. They had been, well supplied with arms, and their soldiers had been trained. In fact, like on the European continent, they were almost certainly had the most powerful army outside of Turkey, I would say. They more stronger than any of the other NATO countries, probably by far, because they're not officially part of NATO. NATO cannot invoke Article 5, and therefore they do not have a legal basis or for entering the conflict directly. Now they've done all but that. In fact, in some ways, you can say they've involved themselves directly. But they haven't made it official. They don't have large numbers of troops on the ground. They have some troops, clearly, but not large numbers that are in uniform. That has prevented it from expanding to an all-out war between Russia and NATO. But we're right there at the at the edge of the abyss there.
Right. I did learn one thing from Putin, not Putin, from Biden in his press conference. Cool. So now I do it too.
Yeah, right.
Is that Biden I didn't know that Article 5 was invoked after 9/11. I was too young back then. But that also just shows how, how you can manipulate Article 5.
Yeah.
A bunch of Saudi Arabians hijacked some planes and flew them into the Twin Towers so we invade Iraq. Like that was Article 5 invoked.
Yeah, it was actually used for Afghanistan.
I'm sorry. Afghanistan. It's well, why? Afghanistan didn't attack us, so it just didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, that's very true. There's obviously a lot of manipulation, and probably, if they really wanted to become involved, they could find some justification for invoking Article 5 right now. Or there could be create some sort of false flag or anything. And that may in fact happen down the road. But so far it's clear that they don't want to do it. I mean, I think we got another demonstration of that recently. It's that of course there was back, well over a year ago, there was that incident in Poland, right, with the missiles, and which normally, just runs with every Russian atrocity story. Just shut that one down real quickly. But there was another incident. I'm drawing a blank. I'll blame it on the anesthesia right now.
Okay.
But no. Now I remember. Again, it has to do with Poland. It was actually, there was talk about, agreeing to shoot down Russian missiles that
Right.
were, approaching Poland, over Ukrainian airspace. And it was stated, I think it was by the Ukrainian government, that this had been agreed to and they had worked this out. But then later, a few days later, Poland walked it back, apparently under U.S. pressure. So again, at this point, it's clear that NATO does not want to invoke Article 5.
There was also the news that the UK would allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles to strike deep within Russia. And then that was also walked back, after just a couple days later. Like, no, that's not true. We're not allowing that.
Right.
So you do see some common sense restraint.
Yeah, there is some caution. And we just hope that will prevail. Mm-hmm. But no guarantees.
You were saying something, about how Ukraine had such a large, powerful army within NATO. You said, except maybe Turkey had a more powerful one. I've heard that also from, I think, Colonel Douglas McGregor and a few other people. So does Turkey have and I was kind of surprised, Turkey has a real strong force. Erdogan has a real strong military force? Is it larger than Germany's?
Again, yeah, that's what I understand. They actually have, many more men under arms. These Western countries have really just minuscule forces. Very few men under arms. I think like in France, they say they're talking about Macron was talking about sending 20,000 French troops. He could do that, but he couldn't do much more. I think, and what the UK has 45,000. Germany, I think, is in the same league. We're talking about tens of thousands. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands. But Turkey at least has hundreds of thousands. I don't know what the exact number is. And, they are well armed with both Western and Russian weapons. They have the, I guess, the S-400s that's something that created quite a hullabaloo. The U.S. was not happy about the fact that they bought those systems from Russia, but they have them.
What is Erdogan's stance, kind of? He seems to flip-flop a lot.
Oh, so yeah. He's always, playing one side off against the other. Mm-hmm. His stance, officially, like a lot of time when there are votes taken, he will vote on the Western side. But he's obviously kept, maintained overall decent relations with Russia. Sometimes he's really angered the Russians, like when he stabbed them in the back over that Azovstal deal. If you remember, in Mariupol, there were number of it was the Azov battalion was holed up in the Azovstal steel plant, and they completely surrounded. They ended up surrendering, and part of the deal was that certain leaders, these far-right ultranationalists, would be sent to Turkey, and they would stay there until the war ended. And then Erdogan broke that deal, and like a year later, and gave them back to Ukraine, just to curry favor with the West. So he'll do that. And then the Russians, I think everybody knows what Erdogan's all about. But all in all, he's maintained good relations or decent relations. He's maintained relations with Russia, unlike the rest of Europe. And that's quite significant. Just to give you an example of that, I are going to fly to Russia, in just a few weeks here. And we're going to fly there through Istanbul because we can't fly from any European airport.
Mm-hmm. Except for Turkey.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah. You're right. Istanbul is in Europe, just barely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well, I will play a clip for you. This is from the press conference on Thursday. And I just want to have your reaction on it, because this is something that keeps on getting said again and again by Biden and just NATO leaders, Western European leaders. So here we go.
But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway.
Yeah, well, that's
what the hell's he talking about?
Yeah, that's beyond absurd. because Putin not only did not say anything about conquering any other part of Europe, he didn't even say anything about conquering Ukraine. There was a reason he called it a special military operation. It was a limited military operation whose objectives he laid out in that speech that he clearly misremembered. And the main objectives were denazification and demilitarization. And he nearly achieved it. I think we got to remember that. Again, there was an agreement that was a draft agreement that was reached between Russia and Ukraine that was initialed by both sides. And the copies, we heard about this again. You didn't hear about it in the mainstream press for years, but recently it came out in the New York Times. And the agreement was that Russia would withdraw from all the territories that it had just occupied. Now the Donbass, the question of the Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, would be negotiated later down the road. But the Russians didn't even insist on making those territories part of Russia. At the time, they were not. Russia had recognized them as independent republics, and they weren't insisting on them being Russian territory. So not even the Donbass was he talking about seizing. So it's just beyond absurd what Biden was saying there. If he was going to point to that as far as evidence, that was just very powerful evidence that there was never the objective of the Russians.
But is there something like I've heard this stated over and over again from different people saying like, oh, just read what he said. Anybody I've heard Lindsey Graham say like,
where's the quote?
Yeah, I was watching Fox News a while ago, and Lindsey Graham's like, anybody that spent 2 seconds listening to Putin would know that he's not stopping there. He's going to roll over. He's going to be marching down London. Westminster Abbey's falling. He's coming to D.C. That's literally what they're saying. They really believe that he's just going to roll over all of Europe, and they keep on saying just listen to Putin, listen to what he says.
Right. I would recommend that everybody do listen to him, and they'll find out something very different. First of all, they'll be struck by how intelligent he is. How they'll be very impressed by his command of the facts, and also just by his rationality. He's what I guess Biden at this conference called a murderous madman. But he's anything but that. He's very calm. He's very rational. He's very patient. And, his objectives were limited. It's just like they become larger. He's never talked about, and I think would have no reason ever to go beyond Ukraine. But now he's expanded his objectives because he's been forced to, because of the Western response to his limited operation.
But there has to be is
there
anything?
There's nothing.
They keep on saying
nobody has ever shown me anything. Seriously, right? They say just listen, whatever. I've never seen. I suppose somebody who's said so much, has so many words on the record, you probably could find one sentence that you can pull out of context. But I haven't even seen that. Maybe there's something like that. But it's just clear. The guy is actually very consistent. He's not like Trump, who's all over the map. We're going to bomb Moscow one day, we're going to pull out of NATO the next, or whatever. He's very consistent. He has gradually increased his objectives, but it's just in response to the Western support for Ukraine.
So there's absolutely nothing that this is being based on. So
So it's very clear right now. Right.
They keep on saying this. There's nothing at all.
Right. Right now, it was just recently that he made it clear what the Russian requirements were, what their objectives were, and that was the 4 oblasts, in eastern Ukraine. That's Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. Each of which held a referendum, and it was, it is clear that the great majority of those populations want to be in Russia. And one thing, nobody talks about this. They always talk about Russian soldiers, but a lot of those soldiers that are fighting, especially there in Donetsk, where the most intense fighting is going on, are from the Donbass. What people here would call Ukraine. It's according to their definition, it's Ukrainians fighting Ukrainians. A lot of the people on the front line are doing that are that are getting killed and engaged in the riskiest and most intense combat are from Donbass. It's their land, and they're fighting for it.
Yeah, it's actually very reasonable. If you just take a step back and think about it, it's like, okay, why? If you were in their situation, where there was a coup in your country, like let's say here they overthrow Donald Trump or whatever and install Biden back in, and then people break away, or in Texas or whatever, and then what happened in Ukraine is they started shelling them. They started bombing. They killed 15,000 people in Donetsk and Luhansk, in these regions, breakaway regions, over the span of 8 years. Constant, mini civil war for 8 years, and then the special military operation came by. So if you were living in that area and you for 8 years you hear about every couple days there's an artillery shell starts hitting your town, your city, small arms fire. Yeah, I'm going to be pretty pissed too, and I'm going to sign up and try to fight these guys that are blowing up my grocery store or whatever it is.
Right. Well, and that's where a lot of the fighting again is around Donetsk city now. And I can imagine how motivated those fighters are. They've seen this go on for, now 10 years, and the shelling. And they know that, they're being shelled from these villages and small cities around Donetsk that have been occupied by the Ukrainians. And of course, they're going to be very motivated to take those back and drive the Ukrainians out and, protect their neighbors, their families. That's what it's about for them. And the Russians, and now, before they were willing to be a part of Ukraine, but they always had this very strong connection to Russia. Now they just said quite clearly, and wouldn't anybody think this, forget Ukraine. These people are just, they're killing us. They hate us. They don't want us to exist. We're Russians. We're just going to be part of Russia.
Oof. Well, try telling that to the people at NATO. I mean, they're living in a complete different reality. When listening to this whole conference and everything, it's just it's just a different world. And
it's so different. Right, you just start to. It's hard to, because you have this whole universe. Right, people will talk about this constantly. That you just assume it has to be real. Right, but it isn't. And
it's a completely fabricated universe, but so many people are living in it, but it's all built on lies, falsehoods. It can't sustain forever, right? Just like what we're just saying here, is Putin, just listen to what Putin's saying. He's going to take over all of the world, all of Western Europe. And you're saying there is nothing that's based on.
I've never seen anything really.
I also agree, because I've never. If there was, surely they would be playing it on the news nonstop. Every single time they say, just listen to what he says. Nobody actually says that he said something. Same thing with Lindsey Graham. Putin's just read his speech. Anyways, just look at it. Anyways, what is this? Just tell me. Biden, tell me what he said. I'm sorry, Biden. Man, I'm turning into Biden right now. I'm just all over the place.
Well, we all made fun of his gaffes there, but I thought that was people do make gaffes. It happens all the time. Even people who are really at the top of their game or whatever. But I thought that was the least important part of his presentation. It was just the overall just feebleness and lack of coherence.
That's
the guy thing. Was just so clearly not up to the job.
It's not what he said. It's just as soon as you see him, you're like, oh man, this guy needs to retire. You just see, and his just. You just saw that 26-second clip, just the cadence. So I downloaded the whole conference, his whole speech, or his press conference, and with the software I had, it has something to automatically remove pauses and fillers, which I do to edit clips to make them a little bit faster. So I just clicked to see. It was going to. I forget how many. It was how many 100 pauses. It was going to. It was 58 minutes. It had 17 minutes of pauses that it wanted to remove.
Yeah,
and that just shows you and just me sifting through this press conference again was just so painful. I'm just man, I can't even follow along because his cadence is so slow. He just strays off and mumbles, and then just goes off on a tangent. It's just too difficult, and you just that fact that out of that 58 minutes, there were 17 minutes worth of him pausing just shows that he's not there. He can't. He can't just carry on a.
It was just obvious from the start. From the start to the finish.
Right. Yeah.
There was nothing there where say, "Oh yeah, this man is." Again, he's vigorous. He's capable of leading the so-called free world.
But what's crazy is that people are saying that he did good enough to stay in, to not just to. This wasn't his, it wasn't a coup de grace for him. Right. It was, he's still in it. And like, what are you talking about? He's clearly not in it. Like, why is this guy still around?
I'll tell you, partisanship makes people stupid. So what's happening now is the partisanship is split. There are a few people that are just whatever. They're just not going to see it. They're going to insist that he's okay, and it's just because he's their guy, and they're just going to believe that what he says is great no matter what. But then the other half are the more realistic people who are saying, "My God, we got to get him out." And, they're hyper partisans too, but we got to get him out because, we have to overcome this threat to democracy. We have to defeat Donald Trump.
So let's stage a mini coup right now to save democracy, have a little democratic insurrection and try to overthrow Biden and put in somebody else without having a primary or any democratic process whatsoever.
Yeah, basically,
any effort to save democracy.
Right. Yeah. Apparently, there's $90 million in contributions that have been frozen by what we call them mega donors. If we were talking about Russia, we would have called them oligarchs, and that's what they are. Somebody looking at this from the outside would say, the oligarchs run America.
Yeah, it's so clear. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let me play another little video clip for you. This is This is about Biden saying he has no reason to talk to Putin. I just want to hear your thoughts and analysis on it. All right, here we go.
I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point. Is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And anyway, so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination.
So what was that? Is he going to talk to Putin, or he won't
again,
talk?
That was not coherent, right? One thing I just would remark upon is just this use of the word behavior. If he's going to change his behavior, you hear this kind of talk all the time. It's just sort of like the United States is the teacher in a kindergarten or something, and you just get to discipline different kids. You say, this is just a stupid way to talk. These are, you may say these people are rivals, we disagree with them or whatever, but you don't correct their behavior and, don't refuse to talk to them until they change their behavior. It just shows, I think it's reflective of this hegemonic viewpoint that, clearly he has. It's not that, we are, one power within a world of many different powers, and we need to work out our differences. But rather, we are the hegemon. These people are behaving, or these different powers are behaving improperly, these leaders, and they need to be disciplined. And, it's that kind of thinking that's got us to where we are. And of course, they talk the same way about China. And China is quite, I think it would be quite reasonable to say that in many ways that they're more powerful than the U.S. Yes, yet we think we can somehow just penalize them. I mean, it's absurd, and it's frankly, it's unrealistic. It's just not. It shows that you're not recognizing the world. You don't understand the world that you live in.
Yeah, I don't have any clips from the speech about China, but they did talk about it, and there were. Biden seems to be incredibly hawkish towards China. NATO in general seems to be really. It seems are they really thinking about trying to prepare for a war with China? Because that's the way they're talking. Yeah, and it's just like we can't. We're getting our asses handed to us in Ukraine, and we want to start something with China.
Right. And we're on the verge of a much larger war in the Middle East. Yeah, no, it just seems beyond insane. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but but clearly I think there are some very powerful factions within the defense establishment in the U.S. that are really focused on Asia and China and see China as the main rival. And what's happened, though, is that, we have other people that are obsessed with Russia, and then we have people that are obsessed with Iran, right? And they're all there, right? And instead of just saying, okay, well, we obviously can't do all three, they all seem to end up having a voice. Maybe this is a result, again, of not having a competent leader, somebody at the top. So instead, you just get all these factions get to push their policies, simultaneously. I guess you would say that of the three, it's clearly Iran has been put to the back of the line. I think there is an intention, or certainly there's a desire on the part of a lot of people in the U.S. defense establishment to have a war with Iran. But there's also the sense that we just can't deal with that now. So there's clearly an effort to avoid war with Iran, but we don't see the same kind of effort in China, and which it's hard to understand. I mean, because that would just be that could be such a disaster for.
Yeah, I mean, it won't. It's so out there that I can't wrap my head around they're actually being serious about this, because if it did happen, it would be over so quickly. We just don't have the capacity to wage a war against China.
Yeah,
I mean, China makes everything here for us too.
Right. If it's a long term,
they could crank the dollar. They could crash the dollar overnight.
Right.
If they wanted to as well.
Yeah. Well, they had also recently it came out that 40% of weapon systems in the used by the U.S. military are dependent on components from China. So again, in any sort of long-term war, clearly, we're going to crash.
Right.
We've depleted our stockpiles, and that's it.
The irony is this is why we're sanctioning Chinese banks and stuff, and wanting to introduce further sanctions. And this is what Biden was saying in this press conference, is that that China is boosting up Russia by giving them dual use goods and could be
in other
used
words, just,
in
trading with them.
Steel, chips, whatever.
Machine
which,
tools.
Like you said, which is 40% of our own stuff, military stuff, is coming from China. And also, you failed to mention that the majority of drones that are being used, that the Ukrainians use, are coming from China. So China just sells stuff.
I think
people use their stuff for different things.
Right.
And so you can make the argument that China, actually, I think this is not even an argument. I think this is actually could even be a statement of fact that China is providing more military support to Ukraine than it is to Russia. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say. I mean, you could say that. First of all, probably the most effective weapons that the Ukrainians have, and the only reason that they're really still in the fight, is the drones. I think they end up. The drones are the reason that the Russians have to proceed cautiously. The drones are, they can still inflict a lot of damage. Whenever the Russians get out of their trenches and, cross the fields, they become open targets, easy targets for the drones.
Right.
And that's
where
why
do these drones come from?
Right. They're the Chinese are not selling military drones, from what I understand. They sell them. They're just commercial drones, but the Ukrainians adapt them for military use.
Dual use, just like we say, anything can potentially be dual use. So, that's exactly right. The FPV drones seem to be the most effective weapon that the Ukrainians have. They originally were getting drones from the United States, but apparently they were so expensive and so garbage that they've just started buying drones directly from China and then, fitting them with these explosives to create these kamikaze drones. But they're all Chinese drones, or the vast majority of these drones are from China. So I don't think it's in a statement. China is doing more to support the Ukrainian military than the United States is supporting the Ukrainian military in terms of combat effectiveness.
Well,
let's say that.
Yeah, I don't know.
You heard it here first.
Okay, well that may be an exaggeration, but it's clear, without the drones, I think they just wouldn't be in the fight.
Right. Exactly.
I think at this point, like Russia would probably already be to the sniper. It's just the reason they have to go slowly. I mean, in the end, like they're inflicting tremendous damage. They're just killing a lot of Ukrainian soldiers, but they have to. What's happened is they're forced to kill all these soldiers before they can proceed, because these soldiers can again inflict a lot of fatalities on the Russian forces.
Right.
If they ever, each time they move forward, each time they leave their trenches. I was reading some story. It was about. It was somewhere. I don't know where it was exactly on the lines, but it's there on the on the front lines. They said there was recently the Russians found it was it was a little drone operation center. It was like a cave in a grove of trees, and this down there in this cave was this older man. He was like probably 50 years old, but he had been there for weeks, operating a fleet of drones, guiding them, and he had done a lot of damage, killed a lot of Russians. One guy, an older guy, could actually, be a real,
real menace,
real force. Just pose a real danger to Russian forces. And eventually, they found him. They took out that place. That threat was overcome. But it just gives you an idea of how potent, how effective these drones can be.
Right. I mean, when I look at the Russian side, when they talk about the difficulties they have, it's the drones that they're afraid of more than anything. Right. The infantrymen. You get out there in the open or even through the trees, these things come hunting you down.
Yeah,
and
that must be terrifying, right?
Right. So what they're actually armed with, the anti-drone thing, they have a jamming thing to try to jam them. But the other thing is just this old 12-gauge shotgun, because it's like a bird. So it's coming at you. Right. You got to shoot it, take it out. If you miss, you're in trouble because it's going to hit you. So it's kind of this old school weapon. They're using drones and then motorcycles.
Right.
So you can get away from them. And so that seems to be the most difficult thing for the Russians to counter. And they're actually having to go to more archaic technology like shotguns and drones, shotguns and motorcycles to combat drone warfare. But, all of this money that we sent to Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of equipment, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the Excalibur artillery shells, all of these things, these are not what the Russians are scared of. They're not worried.
They've neutralized them, each and every one of them.
They basically neutralized all of these super expensive, fancy ones, the Abrams tanks, whatever.
Right.
The Russians
a single Excalibur artillery shell costs $100,000.
Right.
Yeah, and it's been neutralized.
Or you buy these drones for $500 from China. Right. That can do way more and are terrifying. So I would go back to my original statement. I think that the drones that China is supplying to Ukraine is providing more combat effectiveness to the Ukrainians than anything the Americans have given them. Because what tell me one thing that the Americans have given or NATO has given to Ukraine that is causing the Russians to shake in their boots, that is inflicting serious damage on the Russians. Is there anything?
I think you're right. I don't really think
it's just the drones.
You look at the missiles. First of all, the missiles have been, largely neutralized by Russian electronic warfare, and the ones that get through rarely do considerable damage. Occasionally they do. Like they hit an air base or something, but a lot of them will hit civilian targets. And then the tanks. You're always seeing us. It seems to me like the age of the tank is over. I might be wrong, but often these $10 million tanks, can be destroyed by, like again, $1,000 drone. You see that happen again and again.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me get Henrik real quick.
Right.
Hey, stop, Henrik. Okay. Whoa. Don't bobble you. Okay, we'll bring.
Okay, we have a special guest.
Special guest on the podcast. Baba's right there.
Okay. Hey.
I want to see him.
Hi, Henrik.
Okay, well, I think this might be a good place to end it.
Okay,
then.
we'll end it there. All right,
Henrik,
very good.
You want us? Can you say bye? Okay, hold on. We'll let you hear.
Okay,
real quick.
I'll talk to him.
Hey, Baba.
Hi,
Henrik.
Hi, Henrik.
Please like and subscribe.
Hey, Daddy.
Yeah. Can you say please like and subscribe?
There you heard it. You heard it from Henrik. Okay.
We'll end it here.
Okay, very good. We'll see you later.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.